Let's talk about ACHON baby milestones. Hey guys, my name is Cynthia Veronica and I'm the mother of a 4-year-old boy named Sebastian who happens to have achondroplasia, which is the most common form of dwarfism. If you are a parent of a child with dwarfism or are familiar with achondroplasia, one thing that you may have noticed or already know is that the development of certain motor skills tend to be a little delayed in children with achondroplasia compared to average height babies. This is due to weak muscle tone, shorter limbs, the larger head size, and some of the other physical characteristics associated with achondroplasia. As a parent, it's probably fairly likely that you've already seen this milestone chart associated with babies with achondroplasia. I want to talk to you about the age that my son Sebastian reached each of these different milestones. I learned that it's important to be patient. Everyone, whether they have dwarfism or are average height, develop in their own time. And I just realized that Sebastian will reach his milestones whenever he's ready to reach those milestones. That being said, it's actually really nice to have a point of reference for when to expect your baby to reach certain milestones, because that way you can also talk to your doctor if they're, more delayed than what is typically expected, or you know that you're not pushing them too hard too fast too. So one thing that I want to note is that a lot of these milestones that are listed in here are things that happen gradually over a long period of time. So for instance, head control is one of these milestones that's listed in this chart. Head control didn't just happen one day instantly, one day to the next, all of a sudden, yay, he can hold up his head. This is something that really developed over time. Full mastery of these achievements was obtained over a period of time. So let's get into it. This chart was developed using survey data that was gathered from about 200 children with achondroplasia. And this chart shows the various percentiles based on the data collected. The bar chart shows the percentiles at which babies with achondroplasia reach these milestones. Another thing to note is this chart also provides some data for when average height babies achieved each of these milestones. However, I am not going to reference these milestones achieved by average height babies, which is signified in this chart with a little triangle. Instead, I'm only going to focus on just the average age at which babies with achondroplasia reached each of these milestones. The first milestone listed in this chart is smiling. According to this chart, the 50th percentile or average age that babies with achondroplasia reach this milestone is at about 2 months. And this is actually really interesting to me because Sebastian actually began smiling very early on. In fact, I noticed him smiling as a newborn the day after he was born. And here's actually a photo of him smiling as a 1-day-old. Another photo of him smiling at about 1 week. Another one at about 2 months, which 2 months is listed here as the average age that this milestone is reached for babies with achondroplasia. I find that interesting because Sebastian, he was actually a pretty smiley baby since birth. So even though he was also a very fussy baby, and I actually attribute that to the symptoms he was feeling associated with achondroplasia because he did have a lot of medical issues, and I won't get into this now, but I will say even for having a lot of medical issues, he still was a pretty smiley baby overall. The next milestone listed on here is head control. According to this chart, the 50th percentile or average age that babies with dwarfism achieve head control is a little over 4 months. For Sebastian, this was actually achieved, I would say, at about 5.5 months, so a little bit on the later side than average. One thing that I do remember is that we were constantly finding ourselves holding his head for support. This is Sebastian at 2.5 months. Another photo of him at about 4.5 months. And when I held him, a position that I constantly was in was one where I was jutting out my belly and leaning my upper body back just to make sure that he had good head support. This is a position that I remember constantly being in during the first several months that he was born. We also did a lot of tummy time, and this was to help promote head control. And then here he is at 5.5 months with full independent head control. Roll over. It sounds kind of like a puppy. Roll over. Okay, so according to this chart, the average age for babies with achondroplasia to achieve this is around 5 months. For Sebastian, it started happening sometime around 7 months. Here is a clip of him rolling over. Sat with propping. So for babies with achondroplasia, this is something that typically happens at about 6 months. So what we did was we actually bought a Bumbo. And if you don't know what a Bumbo is, it's basically a supportive chair. It holds his legs in place. We started putting him in there once he got good head control, which was about 5.5 months, as I mentioned previously. So we started using it to sit him in here with propping, and here's a picture of him at about 6.5 months. We did use the Bumbo for a while, and actually we used it up until he was about 11 months. Here's actually a photo of him in the Bumbo at 9 months and another one of him at 11 months. And actually I highly recommend this for several reasons, but one of the other issues we had with Sebastian was with weak muscle tone. There's also issues with kyphosis, which is curvature of the spine. One thing that was really useful was being able to prop him up with a hard back that was able to support him enough so that he wouldn't slouch. And the Bumbo was such a great tool. So I actually really, truly highly recommend it for children with achondroplasia. And I'm actually going to put a link in the description bar below in case you're interested in this. Sit alone is the next milestone. This one was another one of those gradual milestones that he had to reach. So the average age that children with achondroplasia reach this milestone is 9 months. Sebastian actually started sitting alone at about 11 months. Here are some photos of him at 11 months. When he first started sitting alone without any support, we could never leave him alone for too long, due to his weak muscle tone. So we always had to be nearby, since it took him a while to really gain enough stability to not, involuntarily fall while sitting alone. And we actually had several occasions where we thought he was good. We left him, we were still nearby, but we left him sitting alone and he would just fall over backwards. And so those were moments that were kind of scary for us where, if he would fall backwards, we'd have to make sure, did he hurt his head? So it's something to be cautious of. Crawl. The average age that children with achondroplasia crawl is typically 10 months. This was about the right timing for Sebastian. He did start at about 10 months. He began with army crawl, which is when you crawl with your arms and drag your feet. He also did the traditional crawl, which is when you move with your hands and knees on the ground. He would also do this interesting thing, which is called a spider crawl. And I had never really seen it before until I started reading up on achondroplasia. And it's basically when you're crawling with your hands and you're crawling with your feet planted on the ground as well. So it's an interesting position, but it kind of makes sense because of the shorter limbs. It just, it was a more comfortable position for Sebastian to use when crawling. And he did spider crawl very often, probably more so than the traditional crawl or the army crawl overall during his crawling phase. Pull up to stand. The average age for babies with achondroplasia to pull to stand is at about 11 months. Sebastian, I would say, began doing this closer to about 12 months. In the beginning, he would pull up to stand on furniture, and as soon as he stood up, he would kind of bounce a little, and then he would just plop down on the ground. Stand with support. The average age for babies with achondroplasia to stand with support is 12 months. I would say Sebastian began doing this at about 12 months. It's actually kind of hard for me to differentiate pulling up to stand and standing with support. And once he stood with support, he would start cruising, which is basically holding on to furniture or other surfaces to support for support while walking. The next milestone is stand alone. The average age for babies with achondroplasia to achieve this is 15 months. Sebastian began doing this at around 18 months, and it's where he would basically stand, but not necessarily take any steps. He would stand alone, and there wouldn't be any furniture or anything for him to hang on to. I think also because his limbs were short and so low to the ground, it was easy enough for him to stand and then, purposely fall without hurting himself. Walk with support. The average baby with achondroplasia typically achieves this goal at about 14 months of age. Now, Sebastian, I would say, achieved this closer to about 15 months. And one of the things we did was we used certain baby walkers that were a bit on the heavier side, so they were a little bit harder to push and more stable for him to move around with. And I actually really recommend 2 of these ones that we used. Sebastian absolutely loved them. Both of these worked really well for Sebastian. They were sturdy, they were safe. I really felt comfortable with him roaming around the house with either one of them without me having to, hover over him to make sure that he wasn't going to get hurt. I'm going to have links to these below in the description bar as well. So if you're interested, take a look. Walk alone is the next milestone. The average age for babies with achondroplasia to achieve this milestone is 17 months. At 20 months is when he actually took his first steps, which was really exciting. But I would say he was still really wobbly, and it took him closer to 24 months to really be independently walking. For Sebastian, I noticed that in certain surfaces that were uneven, he was having a lot of trouble. So if he was walking on asphalt, pavement, he was fine. But if he was walking in the park where there was grass and patches of unevenness in the surface, he would have a really hard time. He would topple over, or I would actually have to be careful about the surfaces that he was walking around, especially if it was uneven, just because I didn't want him to fall into a hole or a ditch, an animal burrow, and then get his ankle twisted or anything. So language is another category that's listed in here. This was definitely an area where Sebastian was pretty delayed. I think the main factor for his speech delay was he was born with fluid in his ear. And this is something that is very typical of babies with achondroplasia. In fact, Sebastian didn't even pass his newborn screening in his left ear. Every 3 months or so, we would get a new hearing test with the audiologist. And finally, they suggested after about a year of testing that he get ear tubes put in. He actually got ear tubes put in at 1 year and 3 months. And when he had that surgery, the ENT had said to me, he had a lot of fluid, a lot more than I expected in his ear. And that fluid was very milky in texture. It was very thick. And so that means that it had been there for a long time. So this ear tube surgery was a long time coming, and I actually regret not having done it sooner. The first category in here is babbling sounds. The average baby with achondroplasia achieves this at about 6 months, according to this chart. It's kind of hard for me to say because Sebastian did make a lot of cute noises early on, even shortly after birth. He was definitely making babbling sounds by 5 months. He also made a lot of cute little snorting noises, and I think that's another characteristic of achondroplasia because of their compressed anatomy. They may have some breathing issues, and that was pretty apparent in Sebastian when he was a baby because he was snorting a lot, and you can hear all of these sort of nasally sounds constantly.
My stinky little boy. My stinky little Winkies. Yeah.
The next milestone is saying mama or dada. And in achondroplasia, the average baby says this at about 9 months. And he clearly said dada at about 6 months. And here's the video.
Yes, baby? What were you saying just now? Why, dada? Did you say dada? Dada? Dada?
The next milestone is saying 2-word phrases. The average age for babies with achondroplasia to achieve this is 15 months. I would say at about 20 months is when Sebastian started putting together 2 words to make a phrase. In fact, at about 20 months was actually when my daughter was born, and I distinctly remember when Sebastian was 20 months and we brought Samantha home from the hospital, one of the things he said was, "What's that?" in reference to Samantha. There's another video that I have that's interesting where we're pretending to sneeze. And I like this video because it shows that he's understanding what we're trying to get him to say. So I'm gonna just post this here just to show you that, you know, he's repeating at this stage at about 18 months.
Ready, Sebastian? Achoo! Okay, now Dada's turn. Okay, now Sebastian's turn. Yay! Achoo!
The next milestone is said short sentence. Now, the average age for babies to achieve this is at about 24 months. For Sebastian, he was about 20 months when he started saying 2-word phrases. Here's another video clip that I want you to check out.
Can I see it?
He's basically saying, "Can I see it?"
Can I see it?
Did you catch that?
Can I see it?
We've gone through the entire chart, but there's a few other things that I want to talk to you about that doctors will not tell you about. Your baby with achondroplasia may do snowplow, reverse snowplow, and the achon squat. Now, interestingly, Sebastian did achon squat a lot. And I will say that I noticed when he started first doing it was when he first started walking. It's just something that they do to relieve pressure. It's nothing to be alarmed about. It's very comfortable for them to be in each of these positions. But I will say that when I first started seeing him do, especially reverse snowplow, it was something that freaked me out. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know if it was safe. I didn't realize it was something that achon babies did. Just something of note, these are 3 things to watch out for and that are completely normal for achon babies to do, so don't be scared. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.